For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic. entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, we're heading off to a fascinating long weekend here. There's a lot going on in our program today. In our third hour, Dr. Ben Strauss is going to drop by about extreme weather on the rise. And, what does this mean? Where does this go? I think it's becoming increasingly evident to us, but let's just do a reality check here. And I've got a crazy alert for you about the Dukes of Hazzard. We'll get to that in our third hour. In our second hour, Texas freedom, turns out they really don't want you to know who's dying of COVID in Texas. This is very strange. And in our second hour, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by, and we're going to be talking about the politics and the economics of inflation, which is, it seems kind of obscure, but it actually literally affects all of us. But in this hour, I want to start out and talk with you about it. Take your thoughts, your calls and thoughts on this as well. Number one, let us never forget, and in fact, I just tweeted this, never forget, that had Mitch McConnell not refused to even hold a hearing for Merrick Garland for over a year and hold that seat open so that Neil Gorsuch could be, confirmed on the Supreme Court by once Trump came into office, had Mitch McConnell not done that, you would have Merrick Garland on the court, and the court last night would have stopped the state of Texas 5-4. Instead, it went 5-4 to empower the state of Texas. So this is, Mitch McConnell owns this as much as Texas owns this. And I want to dig into the abortion side of this after the break in about 10 minutes here. But first, I just wanted to speak to the zeitgeist of the moment. I think this is really important that we acknowledge this. Some Americans, and I'll tell you, there are moments when Louise and I feel this way. We were talking about this morning, which is what provoked me to write this. What in all probability is going to be the rant that I publish tomorrow at Hartmann Report. But some Americans feel like we're living through the last days of of the Book of Revelation. You've got a worldwide pandemic that's killing people, including our children. You've got climate change that has now drowned the East Coast, and the West Coast is on fire. You've got probably the most disheartening part of this is that the rescue workers on the East Coast and the firefighters on the West Coast are not only battling flooding and fires, they're battling COVID. You've got a group of right-wing billionaires and religious freaks who've seized control of one of our two major political parties and are hell-bent on taking us back to the 19th century, on crushing democracy, rolling back voting rights. Look at, again, what they did in Texas yesterday. They passed, the day before yesterday, they passed this abortion bill. Yesterday, they passed the You Can't Vote Here bill, as they aggressively are, these white conservatives in Texas aggressively taking more and more, imposing more and more restrictions on the lives of women and minorities in Texas. And a lot of people are just being crushed by this. Emotionally. Obviously financially, in some cases even physically, with losing their homes to wildfires and floods and things, but people are losing their jobs because of an economy that's been battered by recession, by the massive the Bush crash of 2008 is still with us. The Trump crash of 2020 is still with us. The pandemic, the environmental crisis. People are facing huge medical bills simply because somebody in their family got sick. And so some people are just giving up. There's, some of them are ending up in homeless shelters. I mean, literally giving up. Others are just retreating altogether from reading the news or participating in politics, and instead are immersing themselves in yoga or binge watching Netflix. But, you know, times of great crisis like this, and this is the thing that we have to remember. Times of great crisis are also times of great opportunity. And while some people will always, you know, give up and walk away when the going gets tough, you know, giving the trolls and the Republicans what they want, there are others of us who realize the importance of doubling down on our activism. What was it, Hunter S. Thompson, you know, when the times get weird, the weird get going, or something like that. My Sirius XM colleague, Joe Madison, taught me a great lesson years ago about the difference between movements and moments. You know, back in 1872, in November of 1872, when Susan B. Anthony voted in that presidential election, she was immediately arrested, and the following year, 1873, she was convicted for the crime of voting while female. She never lived to see women vote, but she kept up the fight. It was a moment that seemed like a setback, but it was the turning point that reinvigorated a movement. When Reconstruction failed in 1876, the Tilden Hayes election, when, you know, basically the political establishment of America got together, and the white political establishment said, let's stab African Americans in the back, which they did, and end Reconstruction. And, you know, just take that straight to Plessy and onward to Jim Crow. When that happened, it was a terrible moment for African Americans, but it didn't stop this broad and growing movement to create a true multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy in the United States, which we're still working on, by the way. We have a Republican Party right now that has been fully captured by right-wing billionaires, polluting industries, and now crazies. I mean, people who are, you've got a couple of politicians out there, Republican members of the House of Representatives, who are essentially trying to say, if you want to remain a Republican, you have to endorse what happened on January 6th. You've got members of the Republican Party openly calling for bloodshed, Madison Cawthorn's word, as a solution for political conflict. You've got some of these guys, members of Congress, participated in this attempt to seize the U.S. Capitol and assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And now you've got this so far successful effort by Republicans to use vigilantes in Texas to intimidate low-income women. And keep in mind, this is, you know, any woman in Texas who's in the top 20% income-wise, any woman in Texas who's making more than $50,000, $60,000 a year, they can afford a plane ticket to Phoenix or Los Angeles or Denver or wherever they want to go and get an abortion. But using vigilantes to intimidate low-income women in Texas, this program, now that the Supreme Court endorsed it last night on a 5-4 basis, John Roberts, by the way, siding with the 3 liberals, this is now poised to spread all across the United States. Over the next 2 weeks, I predict you're going to see at least a half a dozen states adopt this. They have changed the voting laws in 19 states now, so they can rig elections to maintain their power in the face of dwindling support by the American public. I mean, this is a moment of crisis on so many different levels, and yet it is also an extraordinary moment of opportunity. We all need to dig deep into our inner resources. We all need to reconnect with each other and reach out to the people that we love and the people that we support and who support us, you know, through our friendships and emotionally and even in other ways, other more physical ways. And reconnect with each other and reconnect with our movements. We need to reconnect with nature and experience that, you know, go out and take a walk and just, what can I be in awe of today? Look at those clouds. Oh my God. Look at that tree. Isn't life an extraordinary gift? When I think of what my mother or father, who have both passed away now, what either one of them would give for 2 minutes to just sit here and look at this world. We are so fortunate. And we are so fortunate to have the ability to be political activists, to try to make a better world, to go up against the right-wing billionaires and the polluting industries and the neo-fascist crazies and the demented racists. We are so fortunate to have this moment. We need to hang on to it. We need to immerse ourselves in it. We need to double down. Because this is a movement. We're having a moment, but there's a much larger movement here. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Boy, is that loud.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
After the break, I want to ask the question, is the Texas Republican Party, are they the dog that caught the car? And welcome back. Janet in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Janet, thanks for listening to us on KBCS. What's up? Oh, it sounds like Janet's got other things going on there. We'll get back to you, Janet, in a minute. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to suggest that the United States should invade Texas to protect the human rights of the women who live there. That was our justification for 20 years of war in Afghanistan, after all.
Well, well, it's one of the justifications. Actually, the main one was, we're going to stop America from ever getting attacked again by attacking a country that didn't attack America. But yes, I get what you're saying. And in fact, I tweeted about that yesterday, saying we said we were going to stop the Taliban from abusing women, and, and here we go with Texas. Excellent point.
Well, we have invaded Texas before. Remember Juneteenth and its origins.
Yeah.
So I think there's a parallel situation. But seriously, the Supreme Court has had its Dred Scott moment now.
Yes.
Asserting that women do not have the rights to the protections of the United States Constitution. And they have, I think the majority has degraded the court by violating two of the principles that are supposed to govern all of the court's actions. One is stare decisis, which means standing on decided things or following precedent. And essentially they have just said, oh, we're all for precedent. But Roe v. Wade, that's 50 years old. We don't care. And the other, of course, is judicial parsimony, which means you don't go in and do the legislature's job, which they seem to have taken on to themselves a few years ago by trashing the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. So they have degraded themselves beyond any, hope of being respected again.
Yeah, and this is where if the Democrats have this little window here of about a year, and if they don't blow up the filibuster, reform the courts, outlaw basically gerrymandering and voter suppression, and start putting America back together, they're going to lose elections. It's going to dishearten the Democratic base, and the Republicans are going to become not to say that they're not already, but they're going to sink deeper into their fascist or their neo-fascist belief systems. And to the extent possible, and they're already doing it with these voting intimidation laws, and now legalizing. I mean, they just legalized vigilantes in Texas to go after women, or go after people who help women get abortions. They also, what is almost never mentioned, is that they enabled this new voting law enables vigilantes to stand at polling places and intimidate people.
And has anyone else noticed that the Taliban in Afghanistan and the Taliban in the United States are both actively engaged against vaccinations? The Taliban in Afghanistan and the tribal area of Pakistan were murdering people who were trying to do polio inoculations, or their policemen who are there to guard them. And in this country, we've had people attacking vaccination sites.
Oh, they had to shut one down in Georgia yesterday or the day before because of that. Yeah, absolutely.
So they have absolute right to the sanctity of their own bodies, but we don't have the right to have our bodies vaccinated according to their thinking.
Yeah, it's the American Taliban. It really is. Mike, thank you for the call. 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Okay, so my rant today over at HartmannReport.com. And I just want to lay this on you, and then we can talk about it, and we'll just continue the conversation throughout the day. We've got a couple of guests on, but they'll be relatively short, and most of the time we'll just be talking with each other here. And the title for my piece is "Abortion is the Texas GOP the Dog that Caught the Car." And the case that I'm making, and I touched on this yesterday, but I wanted to fill it out and really do it, is that the Republican Party, ever since the Reagan election, I mean, you can argue, you can take this back to the 1920s, but Eisenhower kind of broke the mold. So let's just look at this since 1980. The Republican Party has been the party of billionaires and big, largely polluting companies ever since the 1980 election. And the problem that they have is that there's not enough billionaires to vote for them to win an election, and companies can't vote at all. So they put together this coalition of 5 groups, these so-called single-issue groups. And here's how I identify them. Group number 1, working-class white racists. This is who Nixon started shouting out to in '68 with his Southern strategy. Number 2, sexually insecure men who are gun and military garb fetishists. Number 3, upper-middle-class and rural, so-called anti-welfare, anti-tax white people. Number 4, so-called Christian religious freaks who want their particular sect running the government. And number 5, the anti-abortion, so-called pro-life activists. Without all 5 of those groups, Republicans can't win elections. Which raises a really vital question, because the Democratic Party also has a coalition. It's well-educated urban whites, racial minorities, gender minorities and women, Social Security and Medicare age voters, and young people. And the Democratic base is growing and the Republican base is shrinking. So this, and the Republicans have to have all 5 of these groups. So could it be that now that the anti-abortion people have got their pound of flesh, now that they've got what they want in Texas, that they're going to put down the bullhorns and go home and say, okay, what? Okay, what else does the Republican Party have to offer me? Oh, they don't want me to have health care? They don't want me to be able to vote? They want the polluting industries to be able to pour more poison into the air? They want my kids to get sick at school. Wait a minute. Why am I supporting the Republican Party? I was with them all along because they said that they were going to stop abortion. Well, fine, they stopped abortion. Now I'm looking around going, what? I mean, 4 out of those 5 groups, the white racists, the sexually insecure men, the upper middle class white people who don't want to pay taxes, and the Christian, the religious freaks, they're going to be with the GOP for a long, long time. But the anti-abortion folks, I mentioned in my piece a novel, a mystery novel I read back in the 1980s. I spent a half hour yesterday trying to find it. I couldn't. I'm pretty sure it was written by Ed McBain or Lawrence Block because I was just reading all their stuff back then. But it's a detective novel. It takes place in New York City. And there's these women getting raped all over the city, repeatedly raped. And the police are trying to figure this out. And eventually what they discover is that what's common among all these women who didn't know each other, but they were all anti-abortion activists in different areas, different parts of the city. And this rapist was impregnating them. And they were all then getting abortions and then leaving the movement. And, you know, it's just totally twisted. I mean, this is just an awful and ugly plot device, intentionally to make the point, right? And it raises the really interesting question. What happens when this abortion ban gets real for Republicans in Texas? What happens when, you know, as routinely does happen, the daughters of the well-off and politically active in Texas end up with unwanted pregnancies? What happens when one of their kids dies from a coat hanger abortion? What happens when a friend or neighbor, you know, that happens to a friend or neighbor? I mean, let's just be honest. This so-called right to life movement, by and large, has never been about life. These are the same people who don't want, once babies are born, families to have access to food stamps or to child care or any kind of subsidies. They don't want to expand Medicaid. I mean, hell, they're fine with forcing kids to expose themselves to COVID in our schools, which is literally killing them. They're all trying to prove that they're tougher than the sociopath from Mar-a-Lago. Children are literally dying, and these pro-life Republicans are pushing laws right now for more children to have to expose themselves to this disease. So have the Republicans, are they the dog that's caught the car? Is this going to backfire on them? And is it going to activate an entire new generation of young women activists on the Democratic side? I think so.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Now, I may be completely wrong here, and we're probably not going to know for a year or two, but I think this is going to blow up in their faces. What do you think?
Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, titled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrist swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless, across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's get some of your thoughts on what's going on here. Janet in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Janet, what's on your mind?
Everything that you're saying this morning is on my mind. I think you are putting it together in a superb stream of consciousness sort of way. My issue for the moment is the anti-abortion Supreme Court decision. And I so want to start calling this anti-abortion effort the product of male opportunity to impregnate anyone at any time that he wishes and leave the consequences to anyone else. And I was thinking, you know, that's what the Scarlet Letter is about. That was a long time ago, the Scarlet Letter.
Yeah. Hawthorne's
and, of
novel.
course, that woman nobly carried her baby. But the idea that any man, a rapist, a father, is entitled to cause a baby to happen inside a woman just enrages me so much, and I don't understand why that isn't the focus.
It's a good point, Janet. That's a very good point. And I think that there's a large piece of this that is all about misogyny. And misogyny is not just hatred of women. It's the in some cases, I think, fear and desire to dominate women as well. Excellent points. Janet, thank you very much for that. Teresa in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, abortion again. Hey, I was thinking, so the question as to when life begins, to me, it feels like it's essentially a religious question. I mean, I think if I'm right, different religions look at it differently. Some are ovulation, some are implantation. I mean, anyway, I'm not really educated on that.
There is a medical definition, and that is brainwave activity. When, you know, this is how they determine that a fetus has died in the womb if it's more than, you know, 20 weeks along, you know, where there is brainwave activity. When that brainwave activity stops, that's when they will declare death legally, put it on a death certificate, and then do whatever surgery is necessary to remove that fetus. So there is actually a medical definition. This whole heartbeat thing is just a canard. At 6 weeks, there is no heart. There is a small bundle of muscles and a little collection of cells that are smaller than the tip of your finger. There's a little collection of cells that someday will be a heart that begin pulsing. But that's not a heart. That heart doesn't form for quite some time.
Exactly. Yes.
And it makes me crazy to hear the word heartbeat on TV, because it's not a heartbeat. It's a tiny electrical tremor. Forgive my interrupting.
Yes. Well, and so in my religious view, and I'm a Christian, in my religious view, really life begins at viability. I mean, that's my sincerely held religious belief.
It's also what the Supreme Court ruled.
Yes, and it happens to match with a rational, medical, empirical, you know, judgment that other people can make.
Right.
And so prior to that, it's a religious question. So why don't I have the religious freedom to pick my time when life begins? Why do I have to pick someone else's religion and they have to dictate to me? So I think abortion really should be argued on the basis of religious freedom. I think they ought to pull out RFRA and just say, look, my religion says viability. I'm not a Catholic, you know,
Yeah.
So why do the Catholics get to dictate to me when life begins?
Well, in part because there's 6 of them on the Supreme Court. I mean,
exactly.
In fact, you know, there's never been more than 15. There's been 115 or 118 people on the Supreme Court, and only 15 have ever been Catholic, and it's mostly right now. And that's not to jump on Catholics. It's that
Right.
Leonard Leo, the guy who was running the whole Federalist Society, I think it's Leonard Leo, the guy running the Federalist Society, is one of these hardcore right-wing Catholics, and that's what they've been pushing toward the Supreme Court over the last decade or so, on the assumption that they're more likely to strike down the right of a woman to have an abortion.
Yes. Well, I say social distancing between church and state.
Yeah. Amen. I'm with you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Don in Watertown, South Dakota. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I'm just wondering, isn't it time that Biden does to Texas what Texas is doing to the rest of us?
What do you mean?
By that I mean it's about time we shut down a few military bases in Texas.
Stop sending them money.
The federal government can do that.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if
once they're without that federal money, that economy will go in the tank so fast they'll be shooting at it the next time he turns around.
Yeah. Don, I'm not real sure if Texas is one of the maker states or the taker states. Whether it's, I'd have to look it up. It is a red state, but whether they're, for every dollar they send to Washington D.C., do they get back less than $1 like California and New York, or do they get back as much as $3 like Mitch McConnell's Kentucky? I don't know the answer to that, but doing something like that, yeah, I'm with you. Don, thank you for the call. Mike in Bailey, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Oh, yeah, my brother called me to needle me about the anti-abortion law in Texas, and I pointed out to him once more, if you're going to hold these women accountable, when are these laws going to require that all males being born as of the day it is put into place to the day you're dropped dead and get put in the ground, why aren't we being required to submit DNA samples so that the men can be held accountable as well as the women? I can have fun and you get to be held accountable for it is a little on the unfair side from the way I look at it.
Yep. And this is what the woman who called earlier, I'm sorry, I don't recall her name, said, that this what you're looking at is a worldview that says men have the right to impregnate women willy-nilly with no consequences and no side effects, and women have to bear the entire burden of not only the pregnancy or in the experience if it's rape, but also of the child for the rest, for the next 18 years at the very least.
Exactly. And I keep pointing out how, him being a conservative so pro-life, that all he seems to be concerned about is that fetus, and everything else after the birth, he's anti-life.
Yeah, these people. These people are not pro-life; they are pro-birth. We just have to be very clear about that. And they're going, out of their way to basically make it very, very clear to everybody. So
I call them pro-fetus.
Yeah, or forced birth, folks. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. Lynn in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
Hi, I'm a nurse, and I've volunteered at Planned Parenthood for years. It appears to me that we do not take this issue seriously until it's in our face that we're losing our rights. We have had very little discussion of this up till now, and certainly not consistent. I heard it mentioned once during the debates.
Yeah, I'm with you, and that's why I'm asking the question. And I'll ask you, Lynn. Is this going to help the Republican Party? I got some correspondence from a few people who are subscribers to my newsletter. One says, that next they're going to deny college financial aid to women who get abortions. They're going to treat the purchase of Plan B as the equivalent of an illegal abortion. They're going to allow state officials to search houses for abortion paraphernalia, including literature promoting an abortion agenda. Another person sent me a note saying, you think the Republicans are going to back off or the pro-lifers are going to leave the Republican Party? You're wrong. This is just going to energize them and increase their numbers. How do you think? What's the political impact of this going to be, Lynn?
I have no idea. I wish I had the answers, but It just seems like the left is on defense all the time. My kid was deployed to Iraq, and when he came back, he was unemployed for 19 months. It's never talked about.
Yeah.
These heroes, 20 suicides a day.
Yeah.
It's not talked about except Veterans Day,
Yeah. It's like crisis on top of crisis. Lynn, thank you very much for the call, and thank you for serving in the ER there. Appreciate it. 44 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your thoughts and mine on these topics right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're right here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Yeah, interesting conversation. What really got me going was when you were talking earlier about, enjoying nature. And, you're up there in Oregon near the coast in Portland. I'm down here, 90 miles south of San Francisco on the coast. Very beautiful areas. Of course, there's been places where towns and cities have been built, subdivisions and so on. And I think last year with COVID, when a lot of people were working at home remotely and they could kind of work whenever they wanted, I did see people kind of walking around enjoying things a lot more. But I want to also tie this into if, it's a big if, we do go to a renewable energy whatever you want to call it, structure, which means, getting rid of fossil fuels almost 100%. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'm wondering is, would that mean, because it's solar and wind, geothermal where it exists and so on, that there would be less power available overall, and so that perhaps you can't have something like a Safeway open 24/7? Because when I first moved to Aptos, and we're talking 40 years ago, that store used to open at 7 in the morning, and it was closed at 7 at night. Right. And by the mid-'90s, it was open 24/7. And this would be, for a lot of these big box stores, I imagine, they might not be able to be open all day. You might not have all these lights on all over cities, which is light pollution, which nobody ever talks about. When you have a blackout because of a huge storm around here, and if it clears off and you have the night sky, you can see a kabillion stars. Otherwise, you don't see that many stars because of all the light. And I think of all the electricity that is wasted because I don't think we need all that much light. And, maybe people would go to bed earlier and get a good night's sleep and use the computer less, use the TV less, and get out and enjoy things. What do you think?
I think there are two separate topics that have a kind of Venn diagram overlap. The question of our consumption of energy and our sources of energy. But I really believe that we have a nuclear fusion reactor running 24/7, 93 million miles away from us, that is blowing out so much energy at us that there's no way we could consume it if we just started collecting it. If every rooftop in America, became a solar collector, we would have such a massive surplus of electricity. We'd be able to do anything. So it's not a question of can we get off fossil fuels? We can easily get off fossil fuels. Even the cloudy parts of the country. The cloudiest part of Europe is Germany, and Germany did this successfully.
Exactly, yeah.
Number one, we can do that. Number two, this whole question of light pollution at night and essentially a religion of consumption, I think is a somewhat separate issue, and probably should exist in its own conversation separate from the cost of electricity, which I'm guessing is going to be going down over time rather than up. You raise excellent points, Dennis. Excellent points, as usual. Dennis, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick with it. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at thomhartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at hartmannreport.com. And, of course, over at thomhartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week. that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com, and the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Susan in Decatur, Georgia. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I was trying to explain to your screener how to explain this, but you are so smart with history and how to tie this up into politics and current events. And I know you're not a fortune teller, but maybe you can guide us on the trajectory that we are on right now. If you add that Netflix special, The Family, with the Taliban agenda of the Republican Party and Bannon's traditionalism plus American exceptionalism, where are we headed?
We're headed toward a neo-fascist state, toward worshiping, a mythical time in the past, the great glory of the past. This was Mussolini's sales pitch, right? This is the sales pitch of every dictator or wannabe dictator. Bolsonaro is doing it right now in Brazil. He's trying to shut down the Supreme Court. He's trying to change the election laws so that he will always win the elections, which is exactly what Orban did in Hungary, which is why Tucker Carlson is praising him on Fox News. That's where you end up, Susan.
But besides giving the Dems talking points and maybe propping up their PR team or something, what else can we do?
I think that we have to get as many people as possible as politically active as possible. We still live in something that resembles a democracy. Large chunks of our democracy have been shredded by the Supreme Court and other decisions, and large chunks of it never really came into being for all Americans. But we still have enough of a democracy that if enough Americans get mobilized, we can do things. We can do extraordinary things in this country moving forward. So, I'm not disheartened. I'm horrified, but I'm not disheartened, and I'm actually optimistic that I think this is overreach on the part of the GOP in Texas, and
right.
Time will tell. But I think it's overreach, and it's going to blow up in their face. We will see. Susan, I got to move along. Thank you for the call. Sharon in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call. I'm calling to be able to share my personal story about illegal abortion.
Okay.
Yes. I'm 76 now. I was 20. I was in my senior year of college, and this is really far-fetched, but the truth is I hadn't had intercourse, but it was close enough that I got pregnant. And abortions were not legal, so I was sent to a doctor who stuck tubes in me, and it took, close to 3 months before I finally went into labor. The labor was horrific. The pain was excruciating, and after the fact, I was hemorrhaging, and my father went and called to find out what to do. Couldn't take me to a hospital because what happened was illegal. So he was told to go and have me put my legs up against a wall and put cold compresses on my belly. Thank God I didn't die.
Wow.
I can't imagine what a woman would go through these days having to deal with that again. Your thoughts?
Thank you for sharing that story, Sharon. That's powerful stuff. This is what it was like for those people who are, young people listening. If you were not, if you were not of an age where you could get pregnant or impregnate somebody pre-1973, you just don't understand what this country was like when people like Sharon and I were growing up. I had there was a girl, I've told the story before, so I won't dwell on it, but there was a girl that I knew in high school that just one day vanished. She just stopped coming to school. And I think this was in 10th grade. And I learned later, maybe a month later, that she had had a back alley abortion and she'd hemorrhaged and bled out. She bled to death at home, in bed. And,
yes.
And was found by her mother in the next morning, and which was apparently not an uncommon story. And this is what happens. Sharon, thank you.
I'm so grateful I was able to graduate and start a job as a public school teacher.
Good on you. Good on you, Sharon. And Sharon, thank you for sharing your story with us. It's
Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Bruce, thanks for listening to WGRN. What's up?
The Georgia or Texas abortion law says anybody can sue somebody who aids or abets, but the way it seems to be written, it sounds like everybody could sue and re-sue the same person over and over.
That's correct.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, it is set up so that if somebody's working as a receptionist in an abortion clinic and literally 1,000 people could sue them, and they would have to defend every single one of those lawsuits separately, which would just bankrupt anybody. And if they lost any of them, they would lose all of them, and then they'd have to pay $10,000 to each person. I mean, this is using bankruptcy. This is using the power of money to crush people, which takes us back to like the slap suits of the California finally made illegal, where people would speak out against corporate practices. The corporations would hit them with these massive lawsuits and try to wipe them out. They went after journalists this way. They went after reporters this way. Now they're going after women who are getting abortions this way. This is not a new trick.
Okay, I thought I interpreted that correctly. I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
If a woman buys a plane ticket, do the airplane companies and the employees also be liable to help her get out?
Apparently only if she says, I need to buy an airplane ticket to go get an abortion. But again, who knows? I mean, none of this stuff has been tested in any court.
Oh, wow.
And the law only covers abortions within the state of Texas. So my understanding is that if a woman buys a plane ticket and leaves town to get an abortion, as long as it's not inside Texas, that does not provide the basis for a lawsuit. But, to paraphrase the old, a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich, anybody can sue anybody in America for pretty much anything. And this just opens the door to massive levels of harassment, which is how it was designed. Up next, Professor Richard Wolff will talk about economics for a minute, and then we'll get back to this topic.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, which is now also available as an ebook. rdwolff with 2fs.com, as well as democracyatwork.info, and you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, P-R-O-F-W-O-L-F-F. Professor Wolff, we had originally planned on talking with you about inflation, but given what's happening in Texas, I'm curious if there is an economist's perspective or an economic piece to this whole anti-abortion thing that, you know, what just happened in Texas and where it's all going.
Sure. Let me offer something that has occurred to quite a few economists and is not particular to me alone. If you abandon abortion, if you deny women and parents in general the right to make a decision about having a child, bringing a child into the world, and all the rest, you're going to create, because we know this from history, an enormous number, nobody knows the exact amount, but an enormous number of children whose parents either did not understand what they were getting into or do not want to be responsible for their children, cannot carry the burden, will not admit that to the friends, neighbors, or even their own family members. In short, you're going to produce an enormous number of badly raised children, children who are not able to develop many of the qualities you need to be a productive member of society. To say the same thing in plain English, you're going to create an army of new generations of people in this country who are going to need enormous amounts of corrective help later in life to compensate for what you are condemning them to by insisting that they be born to people who would otherwise have chosen not to be in the position of parents. And especially in the United States, where we have this exaggerated concern for the baby being born, and then coupled with an extraordinary hesitancy, usually exaggerated in the very people who oppose abortion, in giving the help to their parents for the 18 years between the birth and the person's becoming an adult, in terms of school support and financial support and all the other things normal children need, but these children will need an extra. And the bottom line, therefore, is we're going to have either very disturbed children in huge numbers through no fault of their own, or we're going to have enormous extra costs for social programs at all levels to compensate for this. And the people who are fighting this abortion seem not to want this abortion issue, seem in many cases not to want to face this, not to want to recognize this, not even to want to ask the question, what are the economic implications? I'm not saying that the economic implications are the only relevant ones. Lots of other issues are raised in this abortion struggle. But there is a kind of unwillingness to deal with the enormous economic costs that are going to come down on this country if, in fact, it takes these steps that are like what the state of Texas did.
I think it was the Freakonomics guys back a little more than a decade ago who claimed that the steady drop in crime that we saw in the United States from the mid-1980s through the early 2000s, and there was a steady decrease in crime, particularly in violent crime, that steady decrease was the result of Roe v. Wade and in 1973, meaning that during that period from 1973 to the 1990s, as these as unwanted children would have been maturing and many of them becoming criminals, they were not there because their parents had chosen to have an abortion, and that Roe v. Wade actually was responsible for the decrease in the crime rate in the United States. Is that what you're referencing? Has that study been substantiated? I've never seen a good follow-up on it. I've never really looked at that carefully.
Well, I mean, many studies corroborate that. But I don't want to make it only a question of crime. But just to finish the point on crime, the decline in violent crimes is as impressive since 2000 as it was in the prior period that you just cited. It's really only in the pandemic in the last year and a half, 2 years, that we've had a bit of an uptick. But we are way below, on the order of half the rate of violent crime in this country now that we had in the year 2000. So there's no question that there's a relationship between not having unwanted children imposed on families that cannot or do not want to cope with them. And I won't go into the problems of our foster care system, the problems of our adoption systems, which produce an awful lot of troubled people. But it isn't just crime. It's going to be the need for enormous amounts of mental health correction, compensations on a physical level with all kinds of physical diseases. Children who are not wanted compensating, for example, by eating a great deal. It's the cheapest drug there is, junk food. And we have one of the worst obesity problems, particularly among children, in the whole world. No one can draw a one-to-one line between these things, but it's crystal clear in the medical profession, in the mental health profession, that if you create enormous stresses on people, whether it's because of unemployment or whether it's because of job insecurity or whether it's because they have more children than they can manage, than they want, that they can bestow love upon, you're going to be paying enormous costs for that into an indefinite future.
Wow. We used to have foundling homes in America, places where women would, because they couldn't get an abortion, they would give birth and then they would just drop the baby off on the front step anonymously, and basically giant orphanages and whatnot. Do you see a return to that kind of thing? I mean, is there a whole new piece of our economy that is going to emerge, or on the other hand, that might collapse as a consequence of this Texas law going into effect in, say, another 20 states around the United States, so effectively half of America has no access to abortion?
Absolutely. I mean, that has been the recourse for centuries before we allowed the abortion issue to become a real option for young women and for young parents. The cathedrals of Europe, if you visit them, almost all of them have a place in the wall. Many of them still leave it there for historical reasons, where in the dead of night, a young person could come, leave the newborn baby in a kind of hole in the wall, which would then be picked up on the inside by the nun or the religious cleric, and these people then became the so-called found children that the church would raise. Sometimes the church couldn't cope, and then we have those horrible scandals that have been exploding the whole society of Ireland over the last several years as they discover mass graves of newborns that the nuns couldn't handle or didn't want to the outcome of not allowing abortion are horrible on a level of dimensions that, again, have to be repressed, because if people were clear about them, and the economics is one of them, you'd have much more opposition than you now have.
Yeah, we're not, in other words, we're not having an honest conversation about this in this country.
That's right. We're not. Very partial, very carefully controlled by those who want to get rid of abortion.
Amazing. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much. Great talking to you.
My pleasure.
Democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff on Twitter. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls and the news of the day right after this. And welcome back. Thank you, Joyce. And hang on just a second here. I got to print something, and let me pick up your phone calls. Pat in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Pat. Thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just want to say I was a nurse in London in the 50s, and there the abortion was banned still, but they changed it in the 60s, I think. But the number of damaged women who came through the hospital, they were damaged mentally, they were damaged physically. Many of them were because they'd had so much trauma, and all because of knitting needles, abortions, because of any other kinds. A good friend of mine died at 18. She was impregnated by a medical student, and she got peritonitis. Now, all I can say is that we also got people who were a bit wiser, and they would douche themselves with potassium permanganate, which would cause excess bleeding, and then doctors would do a DNC, and then that would solve the pregnancy problem. But I know potassium permanganate is a very, very useful anti-antiseptic and blood support. I used it to heal up ulcers on my legs. You soak for 10 minutes every day. I fixed it in 5 weeks. Now, so potassium permanganate should come back, but not as a douche. And the other thing is, I think that forcing a woman to have a baby is the ultimate in child abuse. There's no way that child is ever going to be loved in the way it should be. It's not going to be fed. It's going to be neglected. And it's the crime of allowing a baby to be born to an unwilling mother is absolutely the biggest crime I can think of, apart from the damage to the mother of illegal abortions. It's beyond me to even think that someone would allow a baby to be born to someone who didn't care or wasn't able to care, which is more often the case.
And this was Richard's point, and these children end up neglected or abused or sold. I mean, just horrible things happen to children that are not wanted, and then they end up, as Richard pointed out, needing support, needing psychological support, and in some cases needing physical support, or going over the edge and needing to be put in institutions or in prisons.
Oh, yeah. I mean, lots of children were in institutions in London, and my mother adopted one of those little boys. He just couldn't. He was 3, and he could possibly handle the conditions. He was such a troublemaker in the orphanage that they had said that we have to get this child out. And my mother took him over, and he became a charming young man.
Oh, your mother's a hero.
Well, it was she needed the money.
Yeah. Well,
my father had died, and there was 4 of us kids, and she needed a little bit more income to pay the rent.
Right.
So that was one way to do it, and it saved his life because he became a reasonable, happy young man, and so
remarkable. Pat, thank you for sharing your stories with us. What a life you've lived. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have.
You have, indeed. And thank you. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at hartmannreport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com and at hartmannreport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I just wanted to point out that there is no data coming out of Texas. This is an extraordinary report by National Public Radio that is this was yesterday from All Things Considered, the All Things Considered program. Colorful maps of the new online health equity tracker reveal how the COVID pandemic has affected different races and age groups and across the United States. But you can tell something's not quite right, they write. A handful of states are grayed out, and that's not because they've escaped the pandemic. Software engineer Josh Zarabi of Atlanta's Morehouse School of Medicine says there's no data coming out of Texas. A lot of Americans should be unhappy about that. And they should say, like, wow, like, we need the data, right? Because we're missing a huge piece of the puzzle. And then they go on to say it's not just Texas, that there are several of these states. Apparently, about 1 in 5 known cases are missing from the CDC's data set. And the reason why is because this handful of states are not reporting. Texas, Missouri, Louisiana, West Virginia, and Wyoming have submitted fewer than 1/10 of their total cases. Another handful of states, including Florida, Michigan, and Kentucky, have smaller but still significant gaps in their data, completely missing over 30% of known cases. Of the 3 million Texans that we know have had COVID, right? They've been tested positive someplace. 3 million people. Only 81,000 of them are in the data set. That's not even 3%. So now we've got Texas and others just, and these other red states just going, we don't care. We're not going to tell you. We're not, pandemic, we got no pandemic. Come on, send those kids back into the classroom. Don't let them wear masks. It's going to be fun. It'll disrupt things so badly that the Democrats will lose the next election. You know that's what this is all about. That Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott and these other right-wing Republican governors who are passing voter suppression laws, who are passing laws making it difficult to impossible for school districts to require masks, and now with Texas on the anti-abortion bandwagon, more to come, no doubt. They're just like they're on a tear. It's like, let's just destroy America. Let's just I don't know. I'm on the edge of speechless here. So I see Morris in Long Beach, California is on the line here. Morris, you always have something thoughtful to say. Lay it on me. What's up?
Well, what I believe that ALEC, America, ALEC, who they are, I think they're writing all this legislation. I really believe that. And I think the way we can deal with these folks, or the way you can deal with Texas, is going to take corporations to cooperate. You're going to need business institutions to jump up and get in their face, like the NCAA, the NFL, the NBA, postal workers, telephone providers, entertainers. Say, we're not dealing with Texas if you're going to suppress votes, and try to take control of a woman's body. We just ain't cooperating with that. You mentioned earlier that it might be a backlash, and I agree. I think it is going to be a backlash. And back in 1965, I would listen to your interview with Richard Wolff. Those are always good. Back in 1965, when the South left the Democratic Party and went to the Republican Party, they weren't thinking about economics.
You're right.
They had one thing on their mind, and that's how folks operate sometimes. When they say people vote against their own best interests, that's your first example right there. The Democrats couldn't stand Republicans. But darn it, on this one particular issue, when the Democrats tried to expand democracy and give people opportunities to participate in the political system, it upset the Southerners. And we're talking about the elites. We're talking about the elites. I shouldn't say Southerners. We're talking about the rich folks. And that's who's driving the bus right now. You got about 1,000 families dictating everything in this country, Professor, and you know it. But I'm going to tell you something. There's a whistleblower going to come out of ALEC one day. One day, a whistleblower is going to come. You're going to be the author. Because nobody writes like you that's progressive. And you'll probably be the one writing it. It'll probably be about 1,000 pages. But he's going to tell you all the stuff they did in all 50 states so they're not affiliated with it. And that's what we're going to really have us a civics class.
Morris, it's not so much of a secret anymore. You know, Jane Mayer wrote this great book, Dark Money. It's not just about ALEC. I mean, it's ALEC is mentioned in there. There have been several books that just lay out how the billionaires, starting with 1971, when Lewis Powell wrote that memo saying, you know, that this environmental movement that Rachel Carlson has kicked off and the consumer movement that Ralph Nader has kicked off have the potential to destroy our economic system, and this is communism coming to get us, and kicked off the modern conservative movement, and here we are.
These guys, I can't believe that Mark Meadows was to the right of Ronald Reagan, but these guys don't like oversight. They just don't like oversight. And that's what's going on at the end of the day. I was listening to this guy on Fox News when they were talking about mandates. He said, I don't have a problem with private businesses mandating vaccinations, but I do have a problem when the government mandates.
I'm still listening, Morris.
Oh, I didn't understand why he would take that position. I mean, a vaccine is a vaccine. Whether it comes from the corporation or whether it comes from the government, it's a good thing. So I think it's a subliminal way of just sticking it to the government. Why?
Yeah.
They hate the government because they give you oversight. They don't like oversight.
There you go. I'm with you. And plus, they don't like paying taxes. Morris, thank you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this. It's 27 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, I mean, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
To let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capital Switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We try to have a lot of content over at ThomHartmann.com. And, of course, every day my daily rant goes up at HartmannReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at ThomHartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. It's over at thomhartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Just to bring you up to date on the latest news, Nancy Pelosi just announced, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and I quote, first of all, she referenced the Supreme Court's 5-4 decision saying that Texas can ban abortion. She called it cowardly, dark of night, a decision that delivers catastrophe to women in Texas, particularly women of color and women from low-income communities. She went on to say, every woman everywhere has the constitutional right to basic health care. SB 8, this is the Texas law, is the most extreme, dangerous abortion ban in half a century, and its purpose is to destroy Roe v. Wade and even refuses to make exceptions for cases of rape and incest. This ban necessitates codifying Roe v. Wade. So codifying is fancy words, fancy language for, carving into stone, establishing, putting it into law. And that's what they're going to do. Congresswoman Judy Chu has proposed a piece of legislation called the Women's Health Protection Act, which says in the United States, no state can outlaw abortion. Within the limits of Roe v. Wade, before fetal viability, basically. And I don't know the details of the Women's Health Protection Act beyond that, other than that it's basically taking Roe, which has 77% support among the American public, taking Roe v. Wade and saying this is now not just a Supreme Court decision, it's also the law that Congress has made. And Nancy Pelosi says on September 20th, when the House of Representatives comes back into session, this is going to be at the top of the list. And in all probability, it'll pass the House. She's got, plenty of Democrats in the House, and there's going to be a few Republicans who will vote for it. And then it's going to go to the Senate. And in the Senate, there will be 50 Democrats who vote for it, and probably Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, 2 Republicans. And then Mitch McConnell, who set this Texas thing up by refusing to put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court for over 400 days. Mitch McConnell, who set this up by engineering the theft of Merrick Garland's seat by Neil Gorsuch. Mitch McConnell will say, well, no, we're going to call a filibuster. It's not going to get through the Senate. And then once again, the question will be, I get it, Joe Manchin, you want to keep taking money from the coal industry and whatnot and the big pharma people. And I get it, Kyrsten Sinema, you want to take money from the banking and real estate industry and you want to get in good with, the Koch network and some of these right-wing billionaires, and there's probably a real cushy job waiting for you when you leave. But people's lives are on the line. Are you going to vote to blow up the filibuster? Is this, in a weird way, this could be like really good news. If they blow up the filibuster to protect women's abortion rights in the United States, then they can also then pass a protection of our voting rights, which Manchin and Sinema don't seem to give a rat's ass about. Or they could pass, well, there's a lot of things that could be passed. They could pass a $3.5 trillion infrastructure, human infrastructure bill paid for by simply taking taxes on rich people and big corporations back to about half of what they were during the, when Ronald Reagan came into office. Lots of possibilities, lots to think about. Maurice in Chicago. Hey, Maurice, what's on your mind?
You mentioned, for God bless you, first things first. You mentioned the power of money earlier in the program, like money power is behind all these shenanigans and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I will remind you that women in the United States of America have a lot of money, right? But first they got to get tired, Tom. They got to get tired like Fannie Lou Hamer got tired, right? Sick and tired of being sick and tired. They got to get tired of the Donald Trumps, the Mitch McConnells, and the Clarence Thomases. They got to get tired of taxation without representation. They got to get tired of these Republicans running roughshod over their rights. Then you take the fight to Citibank. You take the fight to Wells Fargo Bank. You take the fight to Chase. Then you take it to Bank of America. And I'm not talking about just marching in front of the place. I'm talking about going into those places, closing down millions of accounts, and watch the results. That's my input for today, brother.
Yeah. Preach it on, Maurice. That's great. You should be doing a talk show. Thank you. That was brilliant. And yeah, it's somebody yesterday tweeted it's time for a boycott of Texas. Every sports team, every entertainer, anybody who's got a convention, anything that's going on in Texas, pull it now. And I retweeted that, and kind of echoing what Maurice just said. Richard in Hutchinson Island, Florida. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. Listen, Texas, the legislature in Texas passed a law that enriches private citizens that sue other citizens for participating in a constitutionally legal activity, in this case, abortion. Wouldn't that, a law like that in other states, that other states could pass the same law, just cross out the word abortion, put in gun sales, put in nose jobs, put in anything you want, but it would have the same weight. The device they used in Texas to have private citizens institute the suits was strictly to circumvent the actual law on the books in the United States. It's legal and constitutional to have an abortion. Right. There's also a commercial aspect to it. There are businesses that make money from abortion, but there are businesses that make money from guns. There are businesses that make money from any other activity. Why wouldn't New York or California or a blue state use that same device to pass a law where citizens can sue other citizens for participating in the sale of guns? Well, how is that not? It
is an interesting thought experiment, Richard, particularly given that in Texas, you can just buy a gun willy-nilly and carry it wherever you want. I mean, they just did away with basically the last gun restrictions in Texas. And yet, if you want to get a legal abortion, I'm talking about prior to this week, if you want to get a legal abortion, you have to show up twice at the clinic, 24 hours apart. So you have to, stay in a hotel nearby if you don't live nearby. You've got to get a sonogram. You've got to have a contraption inserted into your body unnecessarily. You've got to hear a speech that was written by Republican male legislators read to you. I mean, it's just there are all these hoops that you've got to jump through in order to get an abortion, including the waiting period. Whereas none of that is true of buying a gun in Texas. So,
so why can't I, if you bought a gun in Texas, why can't I sue you and everyone who facilitated that in exactly the same way that you,
well, you'd have to get a legislature to pass a similar law. And I don't think that this thing is going to withstand judicial scrutiny. But we'll see.
I don't think so either, for that same reason.
Yeah.
If it applies to abortion, it can be applied to anything.
Yep, I'm with you. Thank you, Richard. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, Tom, you were talking about opportunities, and I'm hoping people will use this as a learning lesson of how government works and how important the Supreme Court is and how important it is who the president is. I mean, the president, has the power to shape the court for a generation. And not to revisit 2016, but, when everybody was going nuts over Hillary's emails and I don't like her pantsuits, I don't like her laugh, I'm sitting there going, Mitch McConnell is holding open the Supreme Court seat for a year.
Yep.
And now we're stuck with 3 Trump appointees.
Yep.
And, who knows how long Breyer's going to be around. But, these are lifetime appointments. You have to look at the big picture. And I hope people, understand that going forward, how important the big picture is, how important the long game is. I mean, Mitch McConnell, there's a reason why Mitch McConnell was so obsessed with judges. They are trying to cement their influence, for generations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're spot on, Kevin. And that's why I'm thinking that what we're going to see come out of this is an explosion of political activism. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? To Isaac Newton. It is, I think it's coming. We'll see. I could be wrong, but I think it's coming. Kevin, thank you for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Oh, jeez. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Over at The Onion, the headline, Bounty Hunter tears into Houston on motorcycle wearing bandolier of pregnancy tests. Right. Welcome back. Michael in Los Angeles says you disagree with me. What's up, Michael?
Hey, Tom. It's not necessarily, thanks for taking my call, first of all, and it's not necessarily that I disagree with you. I just want to know your thoughts on this. I have a little bit of ambivalence when it comes to the abortion issue. Now, me personally, I'm pro-choice, and I certainly think it's a woman's choice what she can or cannot do with her body. And as a male, I don't know if it's even in my place to be making that determination for them. But the ambivalence with abortion comes in where if a woman is pregnant and, like, let's say, for instance, I were to assault her and then kill her and then also kill the child that's in her womb, or I kill the child that's in her womb, that's considered murder. And you can go to jail for that.
Under relatively recent laws. Yeah, those laws did not exist prior to the 1990s, and they don't exist in every state. They only exist in some states where if you kill a pregnant woman, you can be charged with 2 murders. Yes. But
okay. So I just wanted to...
That's law, and in fact, it varies from state to state. And I'm quite sure there's no federal law like that. I don't think there's any federal murder law, in fact, and which is why they charge people when they want to go after somebody federally for murder. They charge them with depriving somebody of the civil right of life. But my take on it is that life begins at viability, which is what the Supreme Court established in 1973. And it's if a baby can live outside the womb, then it is a baby, right? At that point, in my mind, but this is which seems to be in the 20-week range, the 20, 23, 24, 25, 22 weeks. I don't pretend to be an expert on this stuff, but prior to that, it's not a baby. It is in some stage of fetal development. But this is. These arguments have been litigated to death, Michael. And,
right.
At some point, we've got to draw a line. The Catholic Church drew this line at intention, right? You can't wear a condom because you are preventing a pregnancy that God wants to have happen, right? So they drew that line there, and they're officially against any kind of birth control. That's the Catholic position. And by the way, you've got some of these people who are, celebrating Texas. This is their next debate, is let's shut down hormone birth control, because they call it, pre-abortion birth control, because it prevents ovum from being implanted. And they believe that the moment of conception is the moment that the sperm meets the egg up in the fallopian tube. Well, 3 days later, it gets implanted in the uterus and begins the process, right? So that's the next step, right? So, and you got other religions that have, that argue that that a child is a child when it takes its first breath, and you've got other religions who in the Catholic Church, up until the last 150, 200 years, defined the life as the point of what they called quickening, which is when you could feel a baby moving, and they said, okay, after that the rules are different. If you hurt a woman in a way that causes that baby to die, to miscarry and no longer be around, then, you've committed a different kind of crime than if you did that before quickening, excuse me. We've been, but, at some point we've got to draw a line. And I think the rational line that the majority of Americans agree with is the Roe v. Wade line, which is viability. If it can live outside the mother, then it has certain rights. And if it can't live outside the mother, then it's part of the mother. It's part of a biological process that's going on in her body. So anyhow, Michael, thank you for the call. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. So we have over at HartmannReport.com my daily rant, which you can find there. And over at ThomHartmann.com, we have the free newsletter, which lists every single website, gives you hot links right out to every single website for every single story that I talk about throughout the program during the course of the day. And then, of course, also at ThomHartmann.com, we've got our weekly video that we put up. And the one this week is kind of mind-boggling. It turns out, if you remember back when Anthony Kennedy resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court right after Trump made remarks about his son Justin, who had signed off on $1 billion worth of loans from Deutsche Bank to Donald Trump, Kennedy resigned, and Brett Kavanaugh was nominated by Trump. And Christine Blasey Ford said he was, essentially guilty of sexual assault. All kinds of tips went to the FBI, and we have just found out what happened to those tips. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Angelo in Chicago. Hey, Angelo, what's up? Angelo? No, Angelo. Let's try Lisa in San Francisco. Lisa, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. I just wonder why, I served on several jury duties, and when they qualify us, they ask us if we can, based on what we know about the trial or what we've heard or our beliefs in general, our religion, anything. They ask us if we can sit on the jury and be unbiased and serve without injecting our own personal opinions into that particular case. And we have to say we do, or we're not on the jury. Yet we can have a whole Supreme Court that just everything is guided by their religious beliefs, and that's okay. I was taught that it was supposed to be an unbiased, the last line of defense. That
that's our
everything
mythology.
Else goes wrong. Yeah.
But at some point, I apologize that I don't recall when. But at a certain point, the Supreme Court, when the Federal Code of Judicial Conduct became law, where federal judges have to disclose certain conflicts of interest, they have to recuse themselves from cases, they have an obligation to behave the way that you just described, Lisa. That Federal Code of Conduct does not apply to the Supreme Court. They exempted themselves from it. They also, they also don't allow cameras in the courtroom. I mean, they're very much in the 19th century, and I think it's just absolutely wrong. I mean, Amy Coney Barrett participated in a decision that had to do with an oil company that her husband worked for. Clarence Thomas's wife Ginny, not only helped set up the whole Stop the Steal thing on January 6th, but took hundreds of thousands of dollars from Heritage and other right-wing foundations. Forgive me, you were going to say something.
Wasn't she in charge of the Tea Party as well?
She was a big participant in the Tea Party stuff. I don't recall the specific details. And for years, Thomas and Scalia used to go out west and hang out with the Koch billionaires and their buddies. It's
completely unfair.
Yeah, I mean, Scalia went quail hunting with Dick Cheney 3 weeks before he ruled in Dick Cheney's favor on the Supreme Court. I mean,
that should be the fairest court in the land.
Yeah, and they're not. They're very much not, and they haven't been for a long time. And it is time for, at the very least, Congress to require the Supreme Court. And Congress has the power to do this. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. You can look it up. Congress shall regulate the court, and it's time for the Congress, at the very least, to say the Supreme Court has to comport. They have to conduct themselves along the lines of the Federal Code of Judicial Ethics that every other federal judge has to go along with as well.
It's making a complete joke of our system.
It's part joke and part tragedy. But yes, I'm with you, Lisa. Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Richard in Naples, Florida. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for being you and being there. Listen, we were just discussing this idea. To me, it's so exciting. I've enjoyed this program today so much. You are now in a nice mood in terms of being optimistic, and I'm so happy to hear that. It's been rough, but I think I see what you're saying. And I think when I listen to what some of the other callers have said and how you discussed it with them, that we are really at a time, as you say, where we might be able to turn the ball way over. And the reason I have to add to it is one of your callers suggested that men are not being treated equally with this law, and it's absolutely correct. And what I was thinking is that, hey, it's going to be so easy for the first lawyer that's asked to represent anybody on this case to say, hey, this law is unconstitutional. It doesn't apply equally to men. And the caller that called in that said men should be obligated to be recognized then would have to come into that case. Either that or the law would be unconstitutional.
Right. Well, and they could, maybe they could even tweak the law a little bit to say not only do you have the right to sue anyone who helps that woman get an abortion, but you can also sue the man who impregnated her.
Yeah, I'm sure. Whatever it took, to make sure that the man is made as responsible as the woman. And
but then,
what you are excitingly let us all know, which is that, hey, we can change the law. We can, or make the law what it's supposed to be in this case, and we can, we can do so much if we all join together. And Tom, thank you for being you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I keep saying, if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. It would be, the church would bless it. There would be a special subsidy program, part of Medicaid for it. Richard, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll continue our conversation, and let's see, Ben Strauss is dropping by in our third hour. That's right. We're going to talk about extreme weather on the rise. See, the other big story right now is the Northeast is underwater. The Gulf Coast is underwater. We're going to talk about that briefly and then get back to this topic. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is Just Another N-Word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examine the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. The gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn, Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout, with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't, and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there. Just, right after the election, before the
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So last month it was chunks of Europe, particularly Germany and Austria, as I recall, that were just being wiped out by massive flooding, just shocking, historic flooding. Today it is New York and New Jersey and the Northeast. Down in Louisiana, you sort of expect hurricanes from time to time, but what is happening in the Northeast is close to unprecedented. Extreme weather is very much on the rise. I wanted to check in with Dr. Ben Strauss. He is the CEO and chief scientist at Climate Central, climatecentral.org. His Twitter handle is either at Climate Central or at Ben_Strauss, S-T-R-A-U-S-S. Dr. Strauss, welcome back to the program. Tell me about how rapidly is this happening? What can we expect to be happening over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years as a consequence of what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, well, first of all, Tom, thanks so much for having me back.
Sure.
Pleasure to be here. And yeah, this was one hell of a summer. And I have to say, last summer was too. It's hard to remember. We had a pandemic going on. We still do. But last summer was a terrible climate summer too. So, we're just a little bit more than 1 degree Celsius into our warming. We have the IPCC, this international group of scientists, advising that 1.5 degrees Celsius is maybe the safer limit we could aim for, and it's already almost out of reach in terms of where we're going to get. But, look at the world that we have here at 1 degree Celsius. It's really quite something. And one of the themes that comes up in a lot of climate research, some of my own, some of the work we do at Climate Central, but really broadly in the science community, is that changes that sound really small on average, like 1 degree, can translate into a totally different world in terms of the extremes. And it's the extremes like the flooding from Ida, and frankly, the flooding was last week in Tennessee, and there was flooding in China, and the fires in California. All of these extremes, right? Small change in the average can lead to a really big increase in your risk of the extremes. So we are in a new world.
We're seeing massive wildfires in California. The giant one in Oregon is just now basically under control. We are at least, I believe, 5 years into a drought here. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. Last year, for a couple of weeks, we couldn't breathe because of the smoke. I'm noticing we had 116 degrees for 3 days here a month and a half ago,
yes,
and I've got trees.
That was 1 degree.
Go ahead.
That was 1 degree less than the all-time record in Las Vegas.
Right, and
that just doesn't belong in Portland.
That's right, and we've got trees in our neighborhood that are clearly in shock. I mean, they're starting the week after that happened, which was back in June. Their leaves are curling up, and they're dying. These trees are dying, and we've got, and I'm wondering, how long is it going to be before our foliage, before our plant base here in the Pacific Northwest begins to resemble that of South and Central California, or even, the high desert of Nevada? How long is it going to be before the East Coast is so regularly and efficiently inundated with floods that large parts become uninhabitable? It seems to me like, I've been on this planet 70 years. So, I don't remember any of this happening the first 40 or 45, 50 years of my life. The last 20 years, it's been like a freight train. And I'm just wondering what the best science is suggesting this world is going to look like in 10 or 15 or 20 years. What are you seeing? What are the studies showing?
Well, it's not pretty. And, I'll tell you that getting the timing down to a 5-year, a 10-year increment, that's pretty tough. It's easier to kind of say what the destination is. Like, let me give you a metaphor or an analogy. Like, if I dumped a truck-sized block of ice, outside on the street right now, I'm in New Jersey and it's July, you don't need a degree to say that it's going to melt, right? It's all going to melt. Much harder to say, how many ounces melt per minute and exactly when does it finish. But, your question about the trees, for instance, in the Pacific Northwest is a really important one because, I've talked to some leading forest scientists who think that California, its equilibrium state, there aren't going to be trees. It's going to be a grassland and a shrubland, right, for the most part. And I used to think of the Pacific Northwest, west of the Cascades, as being one of the better refuges from climate change. Obviously, it's not.
Well, we used to think that we were a temperate rainforest.
Yeah, well, exactly. But think of how much fuel there is west of the Cascades, where it's wetter. And if you get really dry, I don't even want to begin to think of the fires that could happen.
And they are happening. So, bottom line here, we just need. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the past is not a guide to the future. The good news is that this is, it's the most solvable hard problem that we have. We just have to do it.
Right. There's this nuclear reactor 93 million miles away from us, a fusion reactor that is blowing way more energy at us than on our best days the entire planet uses from fossil fuels. And if we simply harvested that energy, we could meet all our energy needs. We could stop burning fossil fuels, maybe use a little bit of it to make medication or something. But that, this is not an impractical vision of a new world, is it?
No, it is not. And really serious, highly detailed research has come out about it that we can do this, right? It's not just a theory. There's a roadmap decade by decade, and not only does it mean really, shutting down, bending the curve on global warming, but it also means cleaner air, less pollution, quieter streets as you have electric vehicles, no soot coming out of tailpipes or smokestacks that, frankly,
which is causing thousands of cancers and millions of asthmas every year.
It's cancer and asthma. It's also just mundane things like the snow turning gray after it snows, or cities getting grimy and gritty. I think someone from the future, when we're all solar and wind, coming back to visit us today would be disgusted by combustion engines, just like we would hate the stink of horse manure in city streets 150 years ago.
Yeah, or walk into a saloon where there's spittoons. I get it. Exactly. Dr. Ben Strauss, climatecentral.org. Thank you, Dr. Strauss.
Thank you so much.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Let's make that future happen. We can do it by ending the filibuster in the United States Senate. Seriously. And welcome back. And I'm trying to see here who's, Nola in Inglewood, California. Nola, thank you for waiting so long. What's up?
My pleasure. Suppose that President Biden was able to put open up 3 Supreme Court justices slots on the Supreme Court.
Right.
What's to stop Mitch McConnell from doing the process of obstructing the candidates?
He's no longer the Senate Majority Leader, so he doesn't control the agenda. That job is held right now by Chuck Schumer. And, as long as the Senate is 50-50 and there's a Democrat in the White House and in the Vice President's office, we can replace somebody. The question is, if Justice Breyer, who is, I believe, in his early 80s, I think he's 83, if he were to decide to resign, and and Joe Biden were to nominate somebody as progressive as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which, by the way, is not even Bernie Sanders progressive. It's kind of solid left, a good progressive. But if he was to nominate somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I'm guessing that there are some Democrats in the Senate who would not go along with it, which is pretty awful to think about. This is what happened with Merrick Garland. Barack Obama, instead of nominating a genuine progressive, he wanted to get somebody that Republicans would vote for too. So he went to the senator from Utah, Orrin Hatch, who was then the senator from Utah, the Republican senator from Utah, one of the 3 most senior Republicans in the United States Senate at the time, and said, "Who is acceptable to you? Name a federal judge who is acceptable to the Republican Party." And Orrin Hatch said Merrick Garland. He's a nice, moderate guy. He's never taken political positions. Nobody knows if he's a Democrat or a Republican, although he was appointed to the federal bench by Bill Clinton, so maybe he's a Democrat, but he seems like our kind of guy. And so Obama says, cool, okay, I'll do that. And he took the Republicans at their word. He believed that they were operating in good faith. And they weren't. And they haven't been since the 1980s. And so, it's going to be a tough one when Breyer resigns, and let's hope he resigns while the Democrats still control the Senate and there's still a Democrat in the VP's position, because look at how Trump got 3 people on the court. I am convinced that he threatened Anthony Kennedy by threatening to expose Anthony Kennedy's son Justin, who loaned over $1 billion to Donald Trump in ways that were probably illegal and certainly corrupt. That he made reference, a public reference, with Kennedy to his son. How's your boy doing? He said that at an event at the White House. 3 weeks later, Kennedy is resigning. You've got Merrick Garland's seat, which was stolen by Mitch McConnell, and thus you've got Neil Gorsuch. And then, Ruth Bader Ginsburg literally was not in the ground yet when Amy Coney Barrett was pushed through the Senate. A process that typically takes a little longer than that, shall we say. And Mitch McConnell blew up the filibuster for all 3 of them. It's like we have to look at what happened here and say, okay, we can play hardball too. Nola, thank you for the call. It's just mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling what the Republicans have gotten away with. Where's the outrage? Right? Where is the media talking about this? Oh, well, if Republicans do it, it's acceptable. If Democrats want to do it, oh my God, they want to pass a $3 trillion. Oh, we can't. We'll be back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at thomhartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And crazy alert, the guy who, this multimillionaire actor who played, John Schneider is his name, he played in the Dukes of Hazzard, with the good old Confederate boys with the Confederate flag on the top of the car and Miss Daisy and all that stuff. He was on Fox and Friends, and as he was making his pitch, saying that we don't need Joe Biden and the federal government coming down here to Louisiana, which is where he has his, multi-million-dollar property. We can take care of ourselves down here. They showed a picture of the General Lee car from that show with a Confederate flag painted on the top, smashed by a fallen tree. Sometimes you wonder, is God trying to talk to us? I don't know. But basically, his real argument was, don't raise my taxes. Right? It's just very simple. I mean, it's sadly, from time to time, you can boil these things down. This is another one. This is three relatively high-profile conservative talk show hosts have now died from COVID. And I've not talked about any of them on the air because, I didn't know personally any of these three guys, but I've met them, at the annual Talkers Convention in New York and whatnot. And they work in my industry, and they believed what they were saying enough, apparently, to not get vaccinated, and then died for it. And I just think that's sad. I think it's a tragedy. I don't revel in their death or their illness. That said, there's this guy, his name is Bob Enyart, another right-wing talk show host, who, back when people were dying from AIDS, he's been in the business for a couple of decades, back when people were dying from AIDS, before we had treatments, he used to read their obituaries on the air over the old Queen song, Another One Bites the Dust. He would gleefully read the obituaries of people who were dying from AIDS on his now defunct TV program, Bob Enyart Live. Well, he's been on a tear also recently about, these vaccines are tested on fetuses and things, so you shouldn't take them. And so he didn't get vaccinated, and so now he's very, very sick. His wife is very sick. I am hoping, I would say praying, that he recovers. And particularly in the hope that in recovering, he might, in some way, have a little more compassion for people who, I'll stop there. I'm starting to sound like, I'm wagging my finger at somebody who's sick, and I don't mean to be doing that. Finally, and this is like crazy alert number 3, Will Cain he's the weekend host for Fox and Friends, and he was on the 5 yesterday with Geraldo Rivera. And he said, he was talking about how people like me talk about people who are unvaccinated as idiots or as, cult followers or whatever. And he said, we're veering dangerously close to exterminationist language. Exterminationist, says Rivera. Absolutely, says Cain. That's the next step, putting the unvaccinated into someplace else, camps, whatever it may be. Which almost provokes me to ask the question on the air, should we be putting unvaccinated people in camps? I mean, don't they represent more of a threat to us than Japanese people in 1944? Or 41, or whatever the year was? I obviously am not recommending that we put unvaccinated people in camps. I do think there is something to be said for letting the market take its course, letting businesses say, some businesses will say, hey, we don't care if you're vaccinated or not. They want that, Republican patron. God bless them. But put a sign out in front that says, vaccine lives here. Or, coronavirus lives here. And then other businesses being able to say, no, you can't come in here if you're not vaccinated and you're not willing to prove it to me in a way that I believe. And now we've got Republican governors like Ron DeSantis, who desperately wants to show that he's as much of a sociopath as that psychopath who lives at Mar-a-Lago. You got him out there saying, no, we're going to pass a law saying that businesses can't do that. You can't say that you have to prove vaccine to get into this restaurant or this bar or into this retail store or the entertainment venue or theater or cruise ship or whatever it may be. You can't do that. It's like crazy has become, normal is the wrong word. Crazy has become something that is just like ripping through the GOP right now. And in some ways, it's real tragic. I mean, these three of my colleagues who are dead and a fourth one who is, very, very ill. His wife is begging people, his listeners, by the way, to stop sending him remedies for COVID-19. People care about people. They want to help out. But it's like this contagious mental illness that has been inflicted on us really since the 1980s, with the idea that greed is good, the marketplace is everything, the billionaires know best, government should have no role in improving the quality of people's lives or promoting the general welfare. God forbid we even use the phrase welfare. Well, it's 3 times in the Constitution. It's in the preamble, it's in Article 1, Section 8, and it's someplace else. But no, we can't have the general welfare because that would mean my taxes might go up and I'm a billionaire. Joe Biden has kept his promise, by the way, and the free $1 trillion deal doesn't raise the taxes on anybody who makes under $400,000 a year. Not a penny. And still, the Republicans are hysterical about it. And, of course, Manchin and Sinema. We'll be back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where we ask, is Walmart a person? Supreme Court notwithstanding, we say no. We'll be back with your calls.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed. Because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barrack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barrack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barrack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalist's killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barrack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwarzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal, this time the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwarzman's 60th. There were some differences, though, she wrote. Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon. Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we've got a new video up about the Senate Leadership Fund and the Congressional Leadership Fund, the SLF and the CLF. Nice, innocent-sounding names, right? Leadership funds and Senate and Congress, but they're Republican super PACs that are taking millions and millions of dollars from fossil fuel and other dirty industries and from right-wing billionaires and recycling that money directly into the campaigns. In fact, in several cases, actually running on the ground, get out the vote efforts for Republican members of Congress, running the entire television operation for some of these members of Congress. Lauren Boebert received over $900,000 from the Congressional Leadership Fund so that she could take the 3rd District of Colorado. It's an amazing story. They spent $437 million just in the last election. This is poisoning this money, poisoning our democracy. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. Your phone calls, find out what you're thinking on all this stuff. Tina in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Tina, what's up?
Your radio show. That's what's up.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
So what's on your mind?
The Bush issue, and I'm going to ask you to think, actually labeling it, we've got to control the narrative. This is not about abortion. This is slavery. Anytime you feel you have the right to say anything about what I do with my body and put a bounty on my head, can benefit financially from controlling me, that's slavery. And until the Democrats and everybody else start calling a spade, move forward. This is controlled by a group of moral zombies. That's what I call a morally living dead. They are not going to stop. Control of both houses, impeach Joe Biden for breathing, because they can invent some stuff. We're worse off than we were. We have got to get serious about what we're dealing with. It's not about women's rights. It's about us to vote. They do not want us to.
Tina, you're fading in and out. I'm sorry. I haven't heard you for about 4 seconds there, but just let me punctuate what you're saying by pointing out that Texas became a state because the people in that part of the United States wanted to be able to own slaves, and they couldn't legally because it was part of, arguably part of Mexico. So, I mean, Texas was born a slave state. I'm reluctant to use the word slavery the way that you are because I don't want to diminish the horrors of slavery, but I think your point is well made, very well made. Thank you very much for the call. Glenn in New York City. Hey, Glenn, what's on your mind?
Hi, concerning this anti-abortion, most of them think they're using the Bible. The Bible says nothing about abortion at all, therefore we're free to choose. But there is something about a miscarriage in Exodus 21, 22.
Right, if you strike a woman and she miscarries, you have to pay her husband a certain amount of money.
Yeah, but it's a life for the woman, but not a repayment for the miscarriage.
Right. And there's also a place, and I it's been a lot of years since I read the Bible, but I'm thinking that it. Well, actually, I'm not sure where it is, but I was thinking in Isaiah or Joshua, but where one of the biblical figures is actually praying to God to cause the pregnant women of their enemy to spontaneously abort their babies, is praying for abortions. And, and presumably God is listening to that. So, as far as I know, that's basically the only two places in the Bible where abortion is referenced.
What they're using now is thou shalt not kill.
Right.
And the importance of the miscarriage is it shows that it's not a living being yet. It's not a life form yet.
Right.
Until it breathes the first breath of oxygen or ether, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then it sparks the life.
Right, that's, yes, thus inspiration. I mean, that's, God breathed into Adam's nostrils and boom, he was alive. Yeah. Yep. Good point, Glenn. Thank you very much. Vincent in Mendocino, California. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I think we need to have someone take the Texas law to the extreme. And by that, I mean, if a Planned Parenthood secretary could be sued, why couldn't she then sue everyone who brought the person to the clinic, including if a woman rented a Ford to get to the clinic, you go after Ford Motor Company, you go after the rental agency, you go after the highway department for providing the roads that brought her there.
The law, Vincent, I get where you're going, and it's like, let's prove the absurdity of this by taking it to an absurd extreme. But the law specifically has the phrase aids and abets, which means, which has been sliced and diced over the years by legal scholars and courts and judges and whatnot, to have a fairly clear meaning, which includes knowledge and intent. And so while, theoretically the Uber driver could get nailed when the woman says, take me to the Acme abortion clinic, because now the Uber driver knows where she's going and presumably why, the company that made the car can't be nailed. Or if she goes and rents a car and drives it there and they have no idea where she's going to drive it, they can't be nailed. But I get your logic, and I honor it. I tip my hat to you, but it's not going to work that way. Thomas in Erie, Colorado. Hey, Thomas, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I was kind of thinking about this since I first heard it, and would the doctor release the information that a woman was having an abortion?
Well, that's a good question, and the whole HIPAA law thing, coming into this, again, nobody knows. I mean, this law is, some are suggesting rather sloppily drawn. Others are saying it's very, very precise, to get around federal review, judicial review. I think it would have been subject to judicial review, and 4 out of the 9 members of the Supreme Court think it would have been subject to judicial review. But,
sure.
Right now we don't know.
Oh, okay, because if, say, the first pinhead's really going to want to go to town on this, so there's a wealthy, say a super wealthy fella a wealthy woman who, public eye or whatnot, and they go after her, and turns out she's not pregnant, would there be a defamation suit?
I don't know. I mean, there are so many if-thens that we just don't know the answers to, Thomas. It's going to be a real interesting next couple of months, I would guess. Thomas, thank you for the call. Tara in New York City. Hey, Tara, what's up?
Yes. Hi, Tom. This is Tara Devlin. I have a show on Progressive Voices, too, so
cool.
I'm just plugging that in there. The reason I'm calling is I appreciate everything you're doing, and also talking about this issue with abortion. But it drives me crazy that the Democrats really need to message better. For example, with abortion, we know that abortion rates go down under Democratic policies, and this is how we have to bring this message to the American people. That's why we're for health and living wages and universal health care, retirement security, education. All of these things reduce the numbers of abortion, besides being, good policies in general. Because if it's about choice, we want, less abortions. And that's why vote Democratic, because those are the numbers. The math doesn't lie. When you educate and provide contraception and sex education, family planning, universal health care, all of these things reduce the numbers of abortion. And the Democrats have to own that, because we are the party of life and the party of patriotism, too, because that's what it's about, to leave no one behind in that way.
Yeah,
right?
it's well said, Tara. The problem is one of mixed messaging. On the one hand, we're saying, as Democrats, we want to reduce the number of abortions, and the way that we're going to do that is by offering, comprehensive sex education in schools, access to birth control, and lifting people out of poverty, basically. But that's all predicated by, yes, we also want to reduce abortions. I think a much more cogent way to message that, if that's the route we're going to take as a party, is to say we want to reduce unwanted pregnancies, which is a completely different thing. And by reducing unwanted pregnancies, you're also reducing unwanted and therefore abused children. You're also reducing the societal load. This is what Richard Wolff was talking about 2 hours ago. The cost of caring for people who grew up unwanted, who grew up abused, who grew up, you know, in systems that, like the foster system, that sometimes works wonderfully and very often doesn't. And so, but I get your point. And I don't disagree with it at all. I just think that instead of saying we want to reduce abortions and therefore we're going to do all this stuff, we should say we should be messaging it that we want to reduce unwanted pregnancies. And that, because that's really the problem. I mean, these women are not showing up because, hey, I think I'll go get an abortion. That sounds like fun.
Exactly.
They're showing up because there's a pregnancy that is going to screw up their lives, and they, you know, or isn't going to work, or they're at high risk, or you know, there's all kinds of rational reasons. Tara, thanks a lot for the call. It's nice to hear from you, and thank you for having me on your show about my new book. I appreciate it. It's great talking with you. Tara Devlin on Progressive Voices. We'll be right back. You've got music. I don't have music. So I'm just going to go right back on the air here. And let's see here. Lynn in John Day, Oregon. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm trying to remember what I called about.
It says here you've been encouraging people to join the GOP to take it back.
I've been encouraging all my non-white friends to join the GOP and take it over, drag it back to its roots, you know, the 1800 roots.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's even going to be possible. I think it's better to encourage people to be taking over the Democratic Party because we've got some problems in our own party.
I know, but the odds are, I mean, the ones that have joined, the extreme Trumpists don't want to be in the party when they're surrounded by black people.
So you're saying get people of color inside the Republican Party to offend the extreme Trumpists?
And it drives them out.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I'm not sure that it's a viable strategy, but I like the way you're thinking, Lynn. Keep it up, and thank you for the call. Don in Pleasant Hill, California. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hi there. Another non-viable situation, but I'll float it out there anyway. This is half-baked.
This is how we get to fully baked ideas, is we try a whole bunch of half-baked ones.
Well, somehow if we can turn this law, the abortion law, towards the sitting Republicans, it sounds like it's a pretty wishy-washy type of law. If you could say Representative King had some relationship, or I think has some relationship with this woman who had the abortion, basically start suing all of the representatives with this law. It's shaky, I know, because you really do want to have some kind of ground to sue them on, but this law may have some kind of opening that you can make things up. It sounds like it. And if you can, just turn it on the representatives.
There is a limit on the ability of lawyers to sue in what is typically referred to as a frivolous suit, without merit, a case without merit, that's just being done for purposes of harassment. And I think that this law, again, there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences coming out of this thing. And one of them may well be that if it encourages frivolous lawsuits, suddenly you start getting lawyers being slapped down for those frivolous lawsuits, or not. I mean, I just, it's really hard to predict how this is going to play out. Other than that, it has awakened a sleeping giant. Not necessarily. It's a terrible cliche, but I think that there's a lot of women who have been, politically active and men as well, by the way, who have been politically active in as much as they show up and vote every 4 years or maybe even every 2 years, who are suddenly going to start, showing up on message boards and participating in social media and calling their members of Congress and showing up at rallies and sending money to organizations that are doing good work. I suspect that this is the beginning. I hope this is the beginning of the end, the last gasp of the anti-abortion movement in this country. We'll see. We'll see. I may be completely wrong. This might be the beginning of the end of legal abortion in the United States. That's certainly how it looks. I hope I'm wrong, or I hope I'm right, and we'll see. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has, you know, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across northern Africa, across parts of southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. What a show and what a week, eh?
Yeah.
You know, starting with Hurricane Ida hitting 16 years to the day that Katrina did, and then going on last night to devastate New York and New Jersey. Same week, President Biden ends the longest war in American history, and now Texas, as you've been focusing on, you know, rolling back reproductive rights to pre-1973. Before Roe versus Wade. And, you know, all in all, Tom, it's a lot to digest, and I honor the optimism of your commentary and the Hartmann Report today. And I think if we can pivot our attention from Bush's endless, needless wars to the real enemies at our doorstep, which would be COVID, climate change, and these anti-democratic forces within our country that want to replace democracy with white male fascism, you know, I think there's hope. But that's the question, Tom. Are we up for the fight? You know, as you wrote today, and as Michelle Goldberg wrote in the New York Times yesterday, you know, the GOP, it's turning its activists into right-wing vigilantes and enforcers. You know, so is the Democratic Party leadership and the base itself, we the people, are we up for this fight? You know, that's the question, I think. And, you know, let's not forget 55% of white women did vote for Trump. So maybe this will be a tipping point for that demographic.
We'll see. I am hopeful. You know, I just don't know. But the question of are the Democrats up for the fight? Nancy Pelosi has come out and said the first piece of legislation coming down September 20th, when Congress comes back, is going to be this women's health bill that explicitly legalizes abortion before viability in the United States. You know, that establishes it at law. So we're no longer relying on the Supreme Court. This is the will of Congress on behalf of the American people. Then, you know, and it'll almost certainly pass the House. It has over 100 sponsors right now. Then it goes to the Senate, and then it's going to get real interesting. So that's probably going to be coming up. Well, it will be coming up in about 3 weeks. And then there's the anti-democratic forces, and I think you're absolutely right, Jeff. We need to be very serious about. Oh, and President Biden issued a statement today in which he just basically said this is just wrong, and he's calling for what he referred to as a whole of government approach. In other words, he's asking basically every federal agency that could have anything to do with holding Texas accountable or restraining them from enforcing this law to weigh in on what they might be able to do. So he's looking for out-of-the-box strategies. Again, you know, we're going to watch this play out over the course of the next couple of weeks. But your points are well taken, Jeff. Thank you. Robert in Wilsonville. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom, good to talk to you. I'm a little bit Jewish, and I've been studying this question for a really long time, and it's the question of fascist regimes. I cannot think of a fascist regime in history that just changed their heart and decided they were going to be different. They were either smashed or crumbled. And I'm wondering if I'm wrong in that, if you can think of an example where a fascist regime just changed.
No. I'm not sure how. I don't know enough about the history of Chile and Peru. that have both flirted with fascism, to be able to say whether there was or was not basically a revolutionary aspect to overthrowing Pinochet, for example, and restoring democracy.
That presents us with some interesting.
Well, actually, there is one example, Robert, and that's the Park regime in South Korea. And Park came in, and General Park, and took over South Korea, ruled it with an iron fist. When he took over, the GDP of South Korea was the same as that of Kenya. Their principal export was fish and human hair for wigs. He basically cloned Alexander Hamilton's 11-point plan to turn a country from a backwater into a manufacturing and industrial base. He did that in a decade. This was in the 60s. And then stepped back and said, okay, we're going to have democratic elections. At least I believe that's the case. I could be wrong. I mean, double check it, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. So South Korea, I think, would be the one example. Robert?
The only one I could kind of think of too was Franco, and that was a situation where
Franco. I mean, there was a civil war there. So, and you can't say that it didn't go down. Yep, Robert, thank you for the call. Anita in San Antonio. Hey, Anita, we just have the last minute here. It's yours. What's up?
I know. I'll be really quick. I just want to be clear that this is not about preventing unwanted pregnancies or lowering the amount of abortions. This is about controlling women.
Yep.
They don't care about preventing abortions. They don't care about preventing unwanted pregnancies.
Yep.
These are people that just want to control women. And what we need to, the message should be, first, it's abortion right now. It's going to be birth control tomorrow.
Yep, and in fact, there was a, let me get this here, somebody just tweeted, morning after, Plan B type pills are still available over the counter here in Texas. They are not abortion pills. They're contraception used to prevent pregnancy. And then somebody else responds going, yeah, now just wait till Greg Abbott declares them illegal and has them removed from drugstore shelves. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Anita, nice to hear from you. Thank you so much for the call. And thank you for being with us today. Let's all take a deep breath, huh? There's so much going on, from forest fires and floods to anti-democratic, so much going on. Especially over this long weekend, try to take a pause and find some awe in the world. AWE, some extraordinary moments. Connect with other people. Let's recharge ourselves, okay? Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!